All right, well, it's been a long time since I've done a video. Not because I don't get lots of questions, I still get tons of questions by email, but the videos I do in my spare time, and I haven't had much of that lately. We've had some big projects at church, we've hired several key positions in the last year. Doing all of that onboarding and recruiting and working through all of these projects with our staff and our elders just takes a lot of time. And so the videos have been bumped to the bottom of the list. Many people have asked for more of them, and so I'm sorry I haven't gotten to it in a while. But one thing I do love about this video format is that I can do a deep dive into a topic that might not make sense as part of a worship service, might actually take more time than I would even have in a worship service. So a couple of weeks ago, I talked about in my Sunday morning message the proposed amendment in Missouri that will make abortion for any reason a right in our state. And I received more pushback than I expected, and from different people than I expected. One person even wrote kind of a fiery note and posted it on our prayer wall in our lobby, which, by the way, my email address is pastor@efree.org. We don't need to put those things on a prayer wall. Others talked with me after the services over the last few weeks or sent emails, and having those conversations was really helpful for me because it showed me just how uninformed many people are about the issue of abortion and just how effective a misinformation campaign has been at confusing and even deceiving Christians about the laws concerning life and abortion in our country and the different states, and in particular, Amendment 3 in Missouri. Now, I do want to say this video is not just for Christians. That's just where I'm coming from. I'm going to share with you what the Bible says about this issue. But actually, that will make up almost no part of my argument. It might be compelling if you're a Christian and believe in the Bible. But if you don't believe in the Bible, if you disagree with everything I say from a Christian perspective, stick around because you could disagree with that and still agree with the conclusion. The conclusion may be compelling to you whether or not you're a Christian, whether or not you agree with the Bible. I think you'll see why in a minute. Now, some people who I talked with were very happy to learn some things that they didn't know before. I did a lot of research into this. I've spent tens of hours now over the last month looking into primary sources and looking behind the news stories and finding what I think is the truth that has not been reported accurately. Some people were happy to learn that. Some people doubled down in their defense of the amendment and why they think even Christians might want to support the amendment. And I'm not talking about just one person here. There were several people that have talked to me about this, and this video is not meant to slam any of them. I just want people to know the truth. I've spent a tremendous amount of time researching this topic now. I've learned a lot, things that I didn't know before and things that I'm not hearing anywhere else. I'm not saying they aren't out there, but I have not seen a good assessment of the amendment and seen that contrasted with some of the other things that are out there in other states. So I'm not going to do a massively comprehensive video, but it's going to be a long one. Okay, so you might want to speed this up if you need to and watch it faster, but I hope that you will watch the whole thing and get all of the information. I want to take some time to talk about what this amendment does, why it matters, and what people should think about it, including Christians and non-Christians. We have to start by defining our terms. I'm not a doctor. This is not a medical video, but I can't talk about the moral, philosophical, and cultural side of this issue without first defining the terms that I will use, like abortion. So what is abortion? Well, the common usage of abortion refers to the termination of an unwanted pregnancy. This is what the primary debate is about. One of the tactics that's used today to obfuscate this term is by lumping in things like miscarriage, which is called a spontaneous abortion. Those are two very different things. When people say they want less abortion, they are not talking about miscarriages or care for people with a spontaneous abortion or miscarriage. That is a completely different thing. We've experienced miscarriage. It is traumatic. And there are medical procedures that overlap between the two situations. A miscarriage will often require labor-inducing medicines or surgical procedures that are also used in terminating unwanted pregnancies. But these are still two different things, and no one that I can find in the legal space is actually confusing these, or the pro-life space for that matter. That has been a huge misinformation campaign that's out there to try to make people think that pro-life people who are writing laws about life and about abortion don't take into account miscarriage or spontaneous abortions. That is simply not true. Every single law that's out there includes that as a consideration in the law. Let's talk about whether abortion is wrong. Is abortion wrong? This really comes down to whether killing any innocent human being is wrong and whether an unborn child is a human being. Ask any person in America if they think they have the right to not be killed, and they will probably say yes. You probably think you have a right to not be killed unjustly. Ask them why they have that right, and some of them will struggle to answer unless there's some moral standard they can appeal to. So no matter who you are and what your politics are, or what you believe about faith and spirituality, if it's wrong to do anything, there's some moral standard that makes that wrong. We generally all agree that it's wrong to kill innocent human beings. That's why it's illegal. It's not wrong to kill innocent people because it's illegal. It's illegal because it's wrong to kill innocent people. Now, for Christians, we believe that human beings are made in the image of God and have intrinsic value, and so they should not be killed without just cause. But even if you're not a Christian, I'll bet you believe that killing innocent human beings is wrong. So hopefully that's a starting point for us. Then is an unborn child a human being? Well, science says absolutely yes. At conception, a new, distinct individual human organism is formed as egg and sperm combine to create a new human. It is genetically distinct from the mother. There is no point from here on where anything changes in that human organism that makes it more human. Rather, there is a gradual phase of development that begins at one place and continues slowly throughout pregnancy and childhood and adolescence as the human grows to become an adult. The fact that there is no clear change from not being a human to being a human should be a major red flag to anyone who supports abortion. Pro-abortionists typically use a term called fetal viability as their dividing line. Now that's ironic because that's not a line. It is a subjective and situational distinction that doesn't really change anything about the little human. Fetal viability, for instance, is drastically different in different parts of the world because it depends on medical technology, not the baby. A baby born at 28 weeks in the US will often survive, but not in many other countries. 100 years ago, fetal viability in the US was around 32 weeks. 50 years ago, it was around 28 weeks. 20 years ago, it was considered around 24 weeks. Today, it can be as early as 22 weeks. Now, did something change in the biology of these babies over the decades in this country so that now they become human earlier? No. The medical technology changed. And guess what? 50 years from now, it's possible that an artificial womb will allow for viability much earlier. That's already been tested and proven with animals. So whether you're a Christian and believe that all human life has value because God made it that way, or not, but you have some other moral standard that makes it wrong to take an innocent human life, you have to explain somehow why the unborn baby isn't human if you're going to take its life. Not to mention late term or partial birth abortion, where this is very obviously killing an innocent human that could definitely survive outside the womb with just basic assistance. So let me shift gears to talk about not just is abortion wrong morally and philosophically, but is it wrong biblically? What does the Bible have to say about this? And if you're not a Christian, stick with me because this is going to be a small segment. I'm going to get back to a lot of other points later. But for the Christians who want to know about this, the Bible does not speak specifically of abortion, presumably because it was not nearly as common of a thing throughout history. There wasn't an abortion industry. There weren't clinics that would provide easy access to medical abortions. But there was an issue that parallels abortion somewhat that the Bible does speak to directly. And before I talk about that, let me show you some verses that tell us we should look at unborn babies as individual persons with intrinsic value who should not be killed. So this would be the biblical argument. Psalm 139:13 says, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion. As I was woven together in the dark of the womb, you saw me before I was born." So here we have God building the baby through his workmanship in the womb, and God giving that baby value as a wonderfully complex, delicate, intricate creation of God before being born. There's value ascribed there by the scriptures. Jeremiah 1:5 says, I knew you, this is God speaking, before I formed you in your mother's womb. So here again, we have God is involved in the formation of this baby. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as a prophet to the nations. And so here already, God is speaking of Jeremiah as someone who, before he was even born, was set apart as an individual human with value and a specific purpose, a role to play. And that is something that happens throughout Scripture. Even before a baby is born, they are looked at as being an individual person who God has created and formed in a miraculous, supernatural way. And he has purpose for those little babies even before they're born. Genesis 1:27 says, so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. This has to do with the creation of the human being, not the birth of the human being. There's nothing in Scripture that would lead us to believe that the birth, moving from one place to another place of the same organism, the same human being, changes its humanness and suddenly gives it value now. So if you are a Christian, it's very, very difficult to make any kind of biblical argument that would not say, from the time of conception, as God begins this creative work of this little baby, they are a human being with value and created in the image of God. Now, I preached on Psalm 51 a few weeks ago, and David said this, Psalm 51:5, for I was born a sinner, yes, from the moment my mother conceived me. So this is very interesting, because David recognizes, and David was a prophet, he had special revelation from God. David recognizes that even in the womb, even from conception, this little human organism has a soul because he was born a sinner. From the moment of conception, my mother conceived me, he was a sinner. And so he's not talking about being born from the moment of birth. He says, and I looked up that word conception. This is from the moment my mother conceived me, literally means that very first time when the sperm and egg come together, that's what's being talked about there. There is an individual person with a sinful nature and a soul. Luke 1:41 says, at the sound of Mary's greeting, Elizabeth's child leaped within her, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Elizabeth gave a glad cry and exclaimed to Mary, God has blessed you above all women, and your child is blessed. Why am I so honored that the mother of my Lord should visit me? When I heard your greeting, the baby in my womb jumped for joy. And so here is a baby that has already been given some supernatural revelation that there's another special baby in the room. Both of these babies are in the womb, and they are already individual persons, and God is already interacting with them. In Exodus 21, we read something really interesting. This is part of the law that was given to the Israelites. And here's the law that was given to them by Moses from God. Now suppose two men are fighting, and in the process they accidentally strike a pregnant woman, so she gives birth prematurely. If no further injury results, the man who struck the woman must pay the amount of compensation the woman's husband demands, and the judges approve. But if there is further injury, the punishment must match the injury. A life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. Now that's really specific, but the specificity there should tell us this means something. This is important. This is not casual. This is not to be taken lightly. This is very hard to misinterpret. And what I mean by that is what's hard to misinterpret is the unborn baby has value. And any harm done to the unborn baby must be matched, life for life, hand for hand, foot for foot. And so whatever is caused, the harm that is caused to that baby is considered harm that's caused to a human that must be paid for, that must be justified. Now, there's nothing in the Bible that tells us that an unborn child is not a person. And there are lots of verses that indicate to us that those unborn children have intrinsic value. They are created in the image of God, that they even already have a sin nature and a soul and are being formed by God. And that's one of the reasons they have intrinsic value. They're already being designated by God in some cases for certain roles and are even given special awareness of other babies around them in the case of John and Jesus. So I think we can safely say that the killing of those babies is biblically wrong. It's against God's will for us. But then what's the parallel issue that relates to abortion? Well, it's what I talked about in my passage or my message a few weeks ago. There was a particular trend in pagan religions in the past to view child sacrifice as a high form of worship to the pagan gods. And you see this all over the world. The sacrifice of one's own child was viewed as high piety and could give you favor with the gods or cause the crops to grow or the rain to come. And we see throughout Scripture this condemnation, this harsh condemnation of child sacrifice, that the idea of a parent killing their own child is absolutely reprehensible to God. It is morally bankrupt. He hates it. And so if God says the unborn children have value, if God says I'm creating the unborn children even in the womb in my image, if God says it is detestable to me when a parent kills their own child, then I think it's very, very safe to say, coming out of all of that, that God detests the termination of a baby in the womb because they are unwanted, because they are inconvenient. And I even likened it in my message to the child sacrifice to the god Molech, and how today the name of the god has changed. The name of the god today is convenience, but this has been a problem throughout human history. It just wasn't a problem in the womb, it was a problem outside the womb, but it was still the sacrificing of people's own children because they wanted something better. They wanted a better life. They wanted better crops. They wanted better weather. They wanted the favor of the gods. Today they want convenience. They don't want to have this child weighing them down. Or in some cases, they may even think that there's a really good reason for it, that they're doing the child a favor by not bringing them into the world because maybe the child wouldn't have a good life or something. But that's never a good reason, certainly not biblically, to take the life of a human. Let's talk a little bit about the legal aspect of this. So I'm moving on from the biblical aspect. That's important for Christians. But even legally, we've heard a lot lately about the constitutional right to abortion. But where does that come from? The Constitution says nothing about abortion. Well, this idea comes from a chain of reinterpretations of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And this is going to get a little legal nerdy here, but stick with me. The 14th Amendment goes like this. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, that's an important phrase, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Okay, so did you hear anything about abortion in there? I certainly didn't. But that is supposedly the constitutional amendment that gives everyone a right to abortion. And the concept of due process under the law was reinterpreted to broadly include a right to privacy as a part of that due process. And that was later reinterpreted again by the courts to include the idea of a right to privacy with respect to terminating an unwanted pregnancy. So that is how we get there. The Constitution says nothing about abortion. The Supreme Court essentially added to the Constitution from the bench, not through an amendment, that there is a right to privacy with respect to terminating an unwanted pregnancy. They reinterpreted it multiple times and almost through a game of telephone arrived at this conclusion, which in my opinion is legally nonsense, that says, oh yeah, the 14th Amendment includes this right to be able to terminate an unborn child and end a pregnancy because that's a decision made in privacy. If you use that same kind of logic on other things, you could say that we have a right to do almost anything as long as we do it privately. I mean, how could that same argument not be used of a 5-year-old child to say, well, as long as you do it privately, you have the right to privacy. I mean, that's part of your due process. So it gets a little more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. And I would argue that there is a stronger case the Constitution bans abortion than actually gives a right to it. So the Fifth Amendment says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Due process of law should be protecting the little human. There's no reason that we could say that that's not a human being in the womb. There's no reason scientifically, there's nothing that would tell us that something changes at some point where they go from not being human to being human. And so they're a person. And the Constitution declares that that person has a right to life, and no person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. And so you could make a much stronger case that the Constitution bans abortion than allows for it. Even the 14th Amendment should be interpreted to protect the unborn. Here's what it says: nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. And so, because we have no evidence or proof that the unborn child is not a person, they fit every definition of it, they should actually be protected by the Constitution. They have a constitutional right to life. So there's no scientific evidence that unborn children are not distinct from human beings. They qualify as persons. Legally, they're considered persons even when it comes to their death before they're born, as long as they are wanted. And that's maybe the most messed up part of this whole debate. What really determines legally if a child is a human being with our current landscape is not anything about the child. It's nothing about the child, whether or not the child is a human being. It's whether or not the mother wants the child. When a person causes the death of an unborn child, federal and state fetal homicide laws recognize that the killing of an unborn child is murder, unless the person causing the death was a doctor with the consent of the mother. And that's a double standard. Why, if the mother and doctor do it, is it just a bunch of tissue with no personhood? But if someone else causes the death of the child, it's the murder of a person. That's what our law currently says. It does not make any sense. The consistent and constitutional legal position should be that abortion, as commonly understood, referring to the voluntary termination of an unwanted pregnancy, is the murder of an innocent person. It violates fetal homicide laws. It violates the constitutional right to life. It makes absolutely no sense to say that this is a person, and if you hurt this person, you will be legally punished as if you murdered a person, unless the parent consents. Would we ever do that to a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old and say, hey, you can't hurt this child, but if the parent's okay with it, then yeah, they can have the child terminated? It doesn't make any sense. Nothing has changed about that child other than their stage of development. But the humanness, the personhood of that child has not changed. And that's very clear. Let's talk about Missouri's law today, because that's really what this video is about. Amendment 3 in Missouri coming up in November. They've gone through legal battles of whether or not it's going to be on the ballot, but it looks like it will be on the ballot. Right now, this is Missouri's law. I'm going to read it to you. Notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, no abortion shall be performed or induced upon a woman except in cases of medical emergency. Any person who knowingly performs or induces an abortion of an unborn child in violation of this subsection shall be guilty of a Class B felony, as well as subject to suspension or revocation of his or her professional license by his or her professional licensing board. A woman upon whom an abortion is performed or induced in violation of this subsection shall not be prosecuted for a conspiracy to violate the provisions of this subsection. So just to be clear on that, abortion is currently not legal in Missouri unless there is a medical emergency. And even if a woman has an abortion, she cannot be prosecuted. The doctor can and can lose their license. Now, here's the definition that Missouri law gives for abortion. Abortion, the act of using or prescribing any instrument, device, medicine, drug, or any other means or substance with the intent to destroy the life of an embryo or fetus in his or her mother's womb, or the intentional termination of the pregnancy of a mother by using or prescribing any instrument, device, medicine, drug, or other means or substance with an intention other than to increase the probability of a live birth or to remove a dead unborn child. Let me just say a couple of things about that. Intention is mentioned multiple times here. Some people are very concerned that laws might be misused, pro-life laws might be misused to prosecute people who accidentally cause the death of a child or have a child that is stillborn. The laws spell this out. It is about intention. It is not about accident. That is very, very clear in the law. And here's the definition of a medical emergency, by the way, in the law. Medical emergency, a condition which, based on reasonable medical judgment, so complicates the medical condition of a pregnant woman as to necessitate the immediate abortion of her pregnancy to avert the death of the pregnant woman, or for which a delay will create a serious risk of substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function of the pregnant woman. And for what it's worth, here's how the law defines unborn child, and viability. Unborn child, the offspring of human beings from the moment of conception until birth and at every stage of its biological development, including the human conceptus, zygote, morula, blastocyst, embryo, and fetus. You can tell I'm not a doctor. Maybe I'm not even saying those correctly. And then viability, or viable, that stage of fetal development when the life of the unborn child may be continued indefinitely outside the womb by natural or artificial life supportive systems. Now, for minors who are pregnant, it's a little bit different. The right of a minor to self-consent to an abortion may be granted by a court pursuant to the following procedures. A hearing on the merits of the petition shall be held as soon as possible within 5 days of filing the petition. At the hearing, the court shall hear evidence relating to the emotional development, maturity, intellect, and understanding of the minor, the nature, possible consequences, and alternatives to the abortion, and any other evidence that the court may find useful in determining whether the minor should be granted majority rights for the purpose of consenting to the abortion, or whether the abortion is in the best interest of the minor. And one outcome of the court is to, quote, find the abortion to be in the best interest of the minor and give judicial consent to the abortion. Okay, so I know that was a lot of legal jargon, but let me make a few points based on what you just heard, and you can go back and listen to them or look it up. It's not hard to find these things. It'll take you 5 seconds to go research Missouri's law on abortion. It's all easily available online. Number one, abortion is allowed if the mother's life is in danger. If you have a situation where 2 people are going to die and you can save one, you save one. You aren't intentionally killing the child to kill the child. You are removing the child from the mother to save the mother. Now, I personally would want to see this done through procedures that do not directly end the life of the child, such as labor-inducing medicines or cesarean section. The law doesn't specify that, but abortion is allowed if the mother's life is in danger or if there's a serious risk of major bodily function being permanently impaired. It's allowed for that as well. That's a medical emergency. Minors can get an abortion for any reason, providing a juvenile court determines it is in the best interest of the child. And rape and incest are the obvious exceptions that could be indicated here. If you've got a minor that's been raped or is the victim of incest, whether it's rape or consensual, there's still the possibility that the court could find that abortion is in the, quote, best interest of the minor. I'm not saying if I agree or disagree with this. I just want you to know what the law actually says today. Now, there are no exceptions for adults that are given in Missouri law for cases of rape and incest. The woman on whom the illegal abortion is performed cannot be prosecuted. Only the doctors who perform the illegal abortion. This is another objection that's been brought up to me is, oh, these poor women under the pro-life laws, they could be prosecuted. No, that is not true. And then another point I would make is removing a dead unborn child, that's the language that's used in the law in Missouri, is not considered an abortion legally. In Missouri or any other state for that matter, I've looked at a bunch of these laws in different states, Texas, Idaho, Ohio, all over the place. And nowhere is spontaneous abortion or miscarriage in any way hindered or considered illegal to care for in any of these laws. In fact, it is always spelled out as not what the law is targeting. It is always given as an exception, Missouri included. That is not considered an abortion. Just the care for a spontaneous abortion is not what we're talking about when we say abortion. Now, should there be more exceptions to abortion? Like in Missouri, for instance, right now, for adults who are not minors, rape and incest are not considered exceptions. And the exceptions seem to be where this debate over abortion often goes. And I think that's because it's hard to argue for the majority of abortions. If it's okay to intentionally kill an unborn child, why? Is it because they aren't human? Well, scientifically they are, by all measures. Morally they are. There's no dividing line that exists along the human development spectrum where they go from not being human to being human. The line can't be breathing oxygen because some adults need help with that, or they will die. The line can't be eating or talking. There's just no clear line where we can say, oh yeah, that's when they went from being not a human to being a human. The majority of abortions, statistically, have more to do with economics and convenience and desire than to do with any of the exceptions. So the arguments lean into the preference and future lifestyle of the mother when they do talk about the majority of abortions, not whether killing the baby is actually a murder of an innocent person. It's all about the future of the mother, the life of the mother. It cares nothing for the child that's in the womb, typically, except making the argument that, well, the child would have had a bad life. But that's certainly not the case, especially if you put the child up for adoption. That's definitely not the case. But those are difficult arguments to make based on the majority of abortions, especially for Christians who are on the fence about some aspects of abortion, which many Christians are. So exceptions usually get brought up, even though they are much more rare than unwanted pregnancy abortions. And here's what I want to say about that. If we can agree that an unborn baby is a human, and that, or even most likely a human, maybe you're not ready to say, yeah, for sure they are, but there's no evidence to the contrary. All the evidence points towards this being a human in the womb. If we can at least agree on that and agree that taking a human life is wrong, innocently, an innocent human life is wrong, then we should be able to agree that abortion, just because a baby is unwanted, is wrong, regardless of what we do with the exceptions. That alone saves millions of babies a year. If we can at least agree on that and say that's our starting point, yes, there are exceptions that we need to talk about. But the exceptions are mainly used as a red herring to distract from the real issue, which is allowing abortion for any reason. I do want to talk about those exceptions briefly, and then I want to talk more about abortion in general. I already mentioned that when it's for the life of the mother, you're basically choosing between two dead people or one living person. The moral thing to do there is to choose the one living person. You end the pregnancy, ideally with induced labor or cesarean section if possible, to not actively cause the death of the child. The child will likely die. The mother will hopefully live, but they didn't both die. It's tragic, but it's necessary in that case. What about a medical condition that complicates the pregnancy but doesn't absolutely require ending it? I read two interesting articles recently. In one, the mother had cancer, and the doctors told her she might as well abort the baby because the chemo would probably kill it anyway. And she did. She had the child aborted, and then she went through her chemo. And someone sent me this as an example of when abortion it could be good. In the other article that I read, a mother was told the same thing, and she decided to try to keep the baby and undergo chemo while remaining pregnant. And she beat cancer and gave birth to a healthy baby boy. If the life of the mother is not at risk, what would justify the killing of an innocent person? And this is where it gets complex for people. I get that. What about other issues like major bodily harm? Well, legally, this is specified in the state pro-life laws as an exception. Major bodily harm, harming a bodily function. And this is spelled out in all of the pro-life laws in all of the states that I've looked at. They use the same language for medical emergency, which includes damage to a bodily function of the pregnant woman. If the pregnancy is likely to cause permanent bodily function, harm to a woman, then abortion is allowed. Again, I would say in that case, use a method that does not kill the child actively. The intent is not to kill the child. When it comes to the legal aspect of this, I don't have a really strong opinion on this one. If I were giving counsel to a woman in this situation, I would generally advise asking God for a miracle, going through the pregnancy as long as possible. Hopefully a C-section could avoid the permanent bodily harm. Doctors do that all the time when there's a high-risk pregnancy. And there may be other more complicated situations that I'm not aware of. So I don't have a really good insight into the legal situation here, because as soon as I talk about something like this, someone will bring up some obscure case that they've heard of, which they may or may not know the details of, and say, well, see, here's an exception that proves your whole argument wrong. But it doesn't prove the whole argument wrong. It just proves that we have a difficult exception we need to talk about. The whole argument is about terminating an unwanted pregnancy, not when there's a medical emergency. And again, the law right now in all these states that have pro-life laws says medical emergency, risk to the woman of bodily function harm, abortion is allowed in those cases. And those are difficult decisions to make for sure. That's a different moral situation than terminating an unwanted pregnancy. Inducing early labor, having a C-section, that's different than, and this will be a little graphic here, I'm sorry, dismembering a live child or chemically killing them in the womb before delivery. If you're on the fence about this, if you're trying to decide what you believe and you really want to know the truth, Go look up the procedures. Go look up how this is done. Go look up the evidence of the children in pain as this is happening to them. I'm not going to get more into that here. But if you need something more to know what's really going on here, you need to go look into that. Now, in the case of rape and incest for exceptions, you have to ask the question of whether two wrongs make a right. Under what circumstance is killing an innocent human being the right course of action after another morally wrong action has occurred? And you could say that it's unfair to the poor woman or girl, and I agree with you. It's not fair. It's also unfair to make her think that it isn't the taking of a human being's life inside of her. It's unfair to encourage her to abort the baby when it may be something that she will struggle with for the rest of her life. In one study, over 70% of rape victims chose not to have an abortion. Listen, rape is a horrible thing, but there can be a redemption story that comes out of it, as the victim can see something good come out of the tragedy. The baby can be adopted. I've met people who were the result of rape and their mothers kept them and raised them. And it's a wonderful story of redemption of what was a horrible, heinous act. It can result in a wonderful, beautiful thing. We don't have to kill the babies. Now, of course, there are health risks involved, especially at young ages. And that's where the other exceptions start to come in. Life of the mother, serious and permanent bodily harm, bodily functions may necessitate removing the baby, ideally, as I've said, by non-fatal means, and the baby may die in that case, but it wasn't the intent of the operation. It's not the intentional killing of a child. It may be the saving of the pregnant woman. A lot of the arguments that people make for the exceptions are just logically incoherent. What if she can't afford to raise a child? Adoption. What if having the baby ends up giving her a reminder of the rape? Well, reminders of tragic things are always painful. Don't add the killing of an innocent human to the tragic things to remember. Also, what about the woman who was raped, gave birth, and now her 5-year-old child is still a reminder of that rape? Does she have the right to have the 5-year-old killed? If the rationale is the reminder of the rape needs to be removed, well, then there are lots of things we wouldn't allow just in the name of removing reminders. What if it was an incestuous relationship? That doesn't change the morality of the situation unless you're going to argue that there's a risk of birth defects. And at that point, we're diving into another realm of abortion, which is to ensure we don't have children with health issues. For all the reasons I've already listed, health concerns or the fear of health concerns in the child do not change the fact that you're taking an innocent human life, which is morally wrong and shouldn't be allowed. You get into dangerous waters quickly if you think abortion because a child has a condition, like Down syndrome, for instance, is okay. What about a heart condition? What about color blindness? Can you abort if you don't care for the sex of the child? The hair color isn't what you wanted? I know that got increasingly more absurd as I went along, but the logic is absurd for the same reasons. I want something different, and because my preference isn't met, it's okay for me to end an innocent human life. That's the argument there. And even if it came about because of tragic circumstances, even if it came about because someone else did something morally wrong, and even if there's the potential for this human to have some health concerns, that doesn't mean we should do a greater evil to avoid an inconvenience, to avoid an unfortunate situation. There are better ways to handle that. I'm sure there will be many people who agree with me on most of this video. There'll be people who think that taking an innocent human life is morally wrong. There'll be people who think that partial birth abortion and late-term abortion are wrong. And hopefully there'll be many people that realize there's no dividing line in the womb before which it's okay to kill the child, and after which now they're actually a human being with the right to life. But the last section on exceptions that I just covered may have lost some of you. Rape, incest, especially involving minors caught in those situations. These are tough situations to think about because we care for the women that are having to deal with these situations. And even though I think that my stance on this is the only morally consistent one, I understand some people still struggle with this and with the exceptions. I won't be surprised if someone says, what if it were one of your daughters? So let me walk through that. I don't want to, but it might be helpful. God forbid, if that tragedy were to occur, and I hate to even think about it, but it might be helpful for somebody, I would do everything possible to support and love my daughter through it all. If there's a life-threatening situation or a risk of serious permanent bodily function harm, I would encourage a procedure that removes the baby without actively killing the child. If there was no way around killing the child to save my daughter, I have no problem saying it is a greater moral good to save one life than to lose two. If that's not necessary and the baby is delivered, my wife and I would adopt the child and care for him or her as our own so my daughter could grow up without that responsibility. Would it be a complication to our lives? Of course. Would it be inconvenient? I guess you could say that. But we don't choose to do immoral things to get out of complication or inconvenience. I find a lot of people want to point to issues of preference or inconvenience or emotion because they don't want to deal with the core moral issue. Does human life have intrinsic value and a right to not be unjustly killed? And are humans human, even in the womb? Some parents encourage their pregnant teenage daughters to get abortions so they don't have to deal with the shame of it. And so their daughter doesn't have the responsibility of raising the child. But really, they are choosing an immoral action, taking innocent human life, for the sake of image and convenience. The right thing to do is to support their daughter, help with giving the child up for adoption, or adopt the child themselves. Okay, so let's bring it all back to Amendment 3 in Missouri. I want to read for you the proposed amendment so that you know exactly what this says. And I'm going to go through point by point and then make some commentary along the way. Here's what it says, Section 36.1. This section shall be known as the Right to Reproductive Freedom Initiative. So it's called the Right to Reproductive Freedom, but really what it is about, as I'll show you, is abortion. The government shall not deny or infringe upon a person's fundamental right to reproductive freedom, which is the right to make and carry out decisions about all matters relating to reproductive health care, including, but not limited to, prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, birth control, abortion care, miscarriage care, and respectful birthing conditions. The wording is intentionally obscuring the main point of this amendment. They've added lots of extra things that are completely unnecessary. No one anywhere is restricting prenatal care or childbirth conditions or postpartum care or miscarriage care. None of that is restricted anywhere. The laws make that abundantly clear. So many people may look at this and think, hey, I'm for I'm for prenatal care. I'm for respectful birthing conditions. I'm for care for miscarriages or spontaneous abortions, as they're called. And they might think, well, I'm going to vote for this amendment because of that. But really, the issue that this amendment addresses is abortion. None of those things are even a concern or an issue. Some people think they are, but they're really mistaken. That's all very clearly laid out in the laws. No one is threatening prenatal care. No one is threatening childbirthing conditions. No one is threatening miscarriage care. And abortion for the life of the mother or major bodily harm, that's all spelled out in the law too. So the only thing that this amendment would do is allow for abortion for any reason. They've tucked that in there. They're calling it abortion care. They've tucked it in there, but really that's what this is all about. Some people have told me that this is necessary because otherwise women won't have care if they have a miscarriage. That's just not true. And by the way, it's also untrue in every other state. It's not true in Missouri. It's not true in Texas. All the laws, look up the Texas law on this. It spells it out. All of the laws on this specify medical emergencies and miscarriages. I've read multiple news articles that have lied about this. I found one article from a legit newspaper in Texas that stated that Texas has no exceptions, for instance, for the life of the mother. And they let that false statement sit there in their news story for a full day before later updating the article to admit, oh yeah, it does have exceptions for the life of the mother in medical emergencies. In other words, the newspaper either didn't read the law of the text of the law at all before posting their analysis, which is mind-boggling to me, or they read it and lied about it. So the story would go viral, and then they quietly corrected it after the damage was done and it had been repeated all over the place. I've had multiple people make that claim to me. No one had actually looked at the law to see the claim was false. Be careful with what you read in the news. Always check the source. Look for primary sources. Look for what does the law actually say, because it's usually not what's being reported. Number 3, The right to reproductive freedom shall not be denied, interfered with, delayed, or otherwise restricted unless the government demonstrates that such action is justified by a compelling governmental interest achieved by the least restrictive means. Any denial, interference, delay, or restriction of the right to reproductive freedom shall be presumed invalid. For purposes of this section, a governmental interest is compelling only if it is for the limited purpose and has the limited effect of improving or maintaining the health of the person seeking care, is consistent with widely accepted clinical standards of practice and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe on that person's autonomous decision-making. Okay, at first this paragraph might seem like a waste of paper. What does this do that the previous section didn't already cover? But if you look at it closely, it doubles down on abortion in particular. Again, abortion is the only thing this amendment changes. Prenatal care, miscarriage, birthing conditions, that's all a smokescreen. So this section basically says that not only can you not deny abortion for any reason as stated above, but you can't delay it. You can't delay abortion. That's the only thing this paragraph adds to the conversation. You know what that's about? That's about any law that would require sharing about risks of abortion with a pregnant woman, or a law that would require a sonogram or any other procedure before an abortion for any reason intended to show a pregnant woman, this is a baby inside of you. And so they're trying to preempt any future thing that would help a pregnant woman decide whether to have an abortion. They're trying to make sure that the Constitution of Missouri would say you can't do anything to delay that abortion. It has to be right away. And the other thing this does is clarify that only the health of the pregnant woman can be considered. The unborn child cannot be a factor in any law in Missouri at all. It is only what is relevant to the person seeking care. That's what this paragraph does. Remember, this is a constitutional amendment that will determine what other laws can be passed in the future. Section point 4. Notwithstanding subsection 3 of this section, the General Assembly may enact laws that regulate the provision of abortion after fetal viability, provided that under no circumstance shall the government deny, interfere with, delay, or otherwise restrict an abortion that in the good faith judgment of a treating healthcare professional is needed to protect the life or physical or mental health of the pregnant person. Now, this makes it look like the government can put reasonable abortion regulations in place after fetal viability. Remember, fetal viability is not a line where a baby becomes human. Fetal viability is a subjective, moving target. It is based more on medical technology than anything to do with the baby. Later on, this amendment is going to define fetal viability as being at the discretion of a healthcare professional. Right now, Missouri law requires a physician to perform an abortion procedure if it is needed, and the amendment says that fetal viability means no extraordinary medical measures are needed for the baby. That is left undefined. So it's just in the opinion of the healthcare professional what is extraordinary to save the life of the baby. So that's how this amendment would define fetal viability. But Section 4 has a hidden feature here for abortionists. And that hidden feature, and really the main contribution of subsection 4, is mental health. There's a case in Idaho right now where the Biden administration has sued Idaho to get them to allow abortions for mental health reasons. They've been trying to use the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act of 1986, which does not mention abortion, to argue that abortion should be allowed for mental health reasons. It's a nonsense legal argument. Multiple Supreme Court justices have already pointed this out. There is no legal case there. But that's what they're trying to use. They're trying to use mental health as the reason to allow for abortions. In Missouri, this constitutional amendment will allow for abortion for mental health reasons at any point in the pregnancy. This is the ultimate legal hack for abortion. If you can make mental health a reason, all you need is for any healthcare professional, not mental health care, any healthcare professional to say you have a mental health condition that would be helped by an abortion. And that's it. You can kill the unborn child at any time. There's nothing that restricts what a healthcare professional can do or who they are. They get to decide if you have a mental health condition. That means someone could walk into a Planned Parenthood, 8 months pregnant, tell the Planned Parenthood staff they want an abortion because of anxiety, and they could legally kill the child. I cannot overstate how big a deal this mental health exception is. It's like the medical marijuana card for abortion. Anyone who wants a medical marijuana card can get one pretty easily. It's not hard to find a doctor who will give you that prescription for just about any reason. A headache or nervousness will do. And I know in different states, it's legal without a medical marijuana card, but that's the analogy, is it's not hard to get that reason. Well, mental health is the same way. This goes even beyond that. You don't need a doctor to give you a mental health exception. You don't need a counselor, a psychologist. You don't need any of that. A healthcare professional can give you the green light for an abortion for any reason, as long as they tie it to mental health. This amendment does not define what a healthcare professional is. The Missouri Constitution does not define it either. There is a law concerning medical malpractice in Missouri that defines it this way: any other person or entity that provides healthcare services under the authority of a license or certificate. So that's the legal standard. Anyone that has some kind of certificate or license of any kind in the healthcare industry could make this decision anytime up until birth. The amendment is hiding the fact that it's a Trojan horse whose real purpose is to make abortion on demand for any reason at any time up to the time of birth a possibility. Because mental health is a catch-all term. And anyone in healthcare with a license or certificate gets to determine what it is. And you could easily say that anyone seeking an abortion is doing it for mental health reasons. If they don't have the abortion, it's going to cause some stress. That's a mental health reason. Subsection 5. No person shall be penalized, prosecuted, or otherwise subjected to adverse action based on their actual, potential, perceived, or alleged pregnancy outcomes, including but not limited to miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion. Nor shall any person assisting a person in exercising their right to reproductive freedom with that person's consent be penalized, prosecuted, or otherwise subjected to adverse action for doing so. And this is where some Christians have been misled. No laws anywhere in the country are restricting care for miscarriage or stillbirth. No laws anywhere put women at risk of prosecution or lawsuits if they have a miscarriage or stillbirth. This amendment does not provide any meaningful protection for that because that is not under threat. All of the pro-life laws specifically spell out issues of stillbirth and miscarriage and medical emergencies and those sorts of things. Now, I can find numerous news articles claiming that that's what's going on, so I understand the confusion, and I've had multiple people bring it up to me in my church, but if you go read the actual laws, this is a non-issue. So why is it here? Why is this amendment filled with this kind of language if it's just not necessary? It's there to confuse people, and it's there to build a coalition. A lot of people will say, well, I don't like the bad abortions. I don't like late-term abortions. I don't like partial birth abortions. I don't like abortions after fetal viability, but I know that sometimes it's necessary for the life of the mother. And there may be some other exceptions, rape and incest and other things. And I definitely want women to have care for miscarriages, and I don't want them to be prosecuted if they have a stillbirth. That's ridiculous. So I will get on board with this amendment because at least it gives some good protections. And it's all based on lies. This amendment does not give any additional protection for miscarriage or stillbirth that isn't already in the law. It does nothing to help women with prenatal care or birthing conditions. This amendment has one objective, cleverly disguised to trick conservatives and Christians into voting yes when they should vote no. That one objective is to make abortion for any reason legal at any time. That's it. That's all this does. Because if you're saying mental health is a reason after fetal viability, and any healthcare professional with a certificate can decide that, you're basically saying any reason. The fetal viability stuff that's in there earlier, it's just a Trojan horse. The mental health exception at any time after fetal viability is the invading army sitting inside the horse waiting to jump out as soon as the horse is let into the city. There's no point in even having the fetal viability stuff in there because even after fetal viability, you can still get an abortion anytime it's tied with mental health. That's what this amendment says. Subsection 6, the government shall not discriminate against persons providing or obtaining reproductive health care or assisting another person in doing so. In other words, you can't even discourage the practice of abortion for any reason at any time. You can't restrict tax dollars being used for it. You can't do anything that will hinder the practice or promotion of abortion in any way because that would be discriminating against people providing or obtaining or assisting with abortions. So how should you vote on Amendment 3? Whenever we enact laws, we should be careful to only enact what is needed and not accept a lot of things we don't want just to get something we do want. It's a really dumb way to legislate. To say, well, we're going to let in a lot of bad laws, but there's part of this that we like, or even lots of it that we like, but there's some bad stuff we don't like. We need to be more precise than that. If there was a proposal to fix some roads in Missouri, but part of the bill said we would also ban air travel in Missouri, I'm sure a lot of us would support the idea of fixing the roads, but vote no because of what else is packaged with the bill. This isn't a bill, it's a constitutional amendment we're talking about. So we need to be even more careful. Maybe you disagree with me that miscarriage and birthing conditions and prenatal care are already sufficiently protected legally. Okay, we can see a proposal on that provides those protections and evaluate it on its merits. But what do you think about aborting a child a week before the due date because the mother has anxiety? Are you good with that? Maybe you believe Missouri needs more exceptions for situations involving rape and incest. Okay, let's have that discussion and that debate and that vote. But will you accept abortion at any time for any reason as long as mental health is claimed just to get those rare exceptions in there? Or should that be part of a separate bill or amendment that's brought up for those specific things? Maybe you believe that there is a dividing line of fetal viability, wherever that is, and that abortion before that line should be allowed. Okay. But what about abortion for any reason up until birth as long as someone uses the words mental health? Think about it this way. If the bill went just a tiny bit further than abortion, how would you feel about that? What if it went like this? The government shall not deny or infringe upon a person's fundamental right to reproductive freedom, which is the right to make and carry out decisions about all matters relating to reproductive health care, including but not limited to prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, birth control, abortion care, infanticide, filicide, miscarriage care, and respectful birthing conditions. Would you say that those other protections about childbirthing conditions and birth control and miscarriage care, would you say that those other protections are so important that it's worth throwing in infanticide and filicide, which is the murder of a child at any age, to get those other things into the state constitution? Assuming you say no, which you should if you have any moral compass at all, how is it any different to vote yes for killing a baby in the 9th month because the mother's experiencing some stress just to get those other protections into the Constitution? Which mother in the 3rd trimester isn't experiencing some mental health concerns? So don't fall for the Trojan horse. Don't fall for the false narratives being pushed in the news media. Always check the sources to see what's really going on. It took me a few minutes to look up the text of this amendment and see what they were trying to pull. It took me several days of research, really a few weeks of research, and many hours to write up and think through and put all my notes together and produce this video. But almost no time to just go look and see what was really going on, to read a news article, to look at it skeptically, to go look up the actual text of a law, or to go look at the Supreme Court's website and see what's actually going on with a Supreme Court case and see, oh, this is what's actually happening. And it's often different than what's being written about in the headlines. So what's next? Well, you're not going to be surprised to hear me say you need to vote no on Amendment 3 for many different reasons. It is a Trojan horse. It does not provide the protections that people think it does. You need to talk to your friends about this and make sure they understand what Amendment 3 really does, because a lot of them may be thinking they will vote for it because of what they have seen in the media or seen online and comments online, and they don't understand what this really does. They may disagree with me on a lot of aspects of what I've said today for many different reasons. But if they can agree that it's not right to kill a child, an unborn child, in the 9th month of pregnancy for mental health reasons, which could be anything, not even specified by a mental health professional, but by just any healthcare professional, then at least we can agree this amendment needs to die. It should not go any further. And if we need to bring up other amendments to refine the laws, then let's do that. But let's not try to obfuscate the issue and sneak in something that provides a sweeping, broad allowance for abortion that goes even beyond where our country was a few years ago with Roe v. Wade, and do it just because we don't understand what's really sneaking into this amendment. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Vote no on Amendment 3.